Welcome to IQ HitList. I'm Vishwas Sadashivan. IQ HitList is Inconvenient Questions one-on-one interview that explores the views of an individual that you want to see. My guest today goes by the nickname of Spudding, and a fairly apt description of how she sees herself. No, not as a couch potato, but as useful as a potato. Perhaps also as a person who thrives under the ground. Her tools for being useful: the written word, blogging, and videos. She has more than 60,000 tweets on her account. Media outlets around the world seem to love her work. AlJazeera, The Guardian, Asian correspondent, Yahoo. IQ, we love her work because she asks damn good inconvenient questions. Here are some examples. Is the Singapore situation really so precarious that freedom of speech and assembly needs to be curtailed to such an extent? What's wrong with being unpredictable? Why should the death penalty be mandatory when it's an irreversible punishment that blinkers all involved to the actual issues related to drug crime and abuse and the variety of motivations that drive people towards them? Now, this woman is a darling to those fighting for social justice, well, in the stricter sense of the word, and human rights activists. But to the government, well, my deep analysis tells me the feeling is somewhat different. Inconvenient at best, not so much thought-provoking, but provocative. For some, she's far more than a nuisance, a dangerous pain in the posterior. I'm being polite here. So what makes her do what she does and keeps flying so close to the sun? Is there method in madness? Kirsten Han is her name. Kirsten, welcome to IQ HitList.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's a good smile. You're looking a little nervous. Why? Because you're not writing and you're talking?
I do actually feel more comfortable writing than talking, yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. My first question to you, you've been described by some as a rebel rouser and even by some as a rebel without a cause. So why are you raising these issues? LGBT, mandatory death sentence, freedom of speech, which affect small groups of people, when there are larger issues to deal with in Singapore. I mean, this is not my view. These are criticisms that have been leveled against you, that you are a cho-cho queen, that you're raising these issues because you're anti-government, you're anti-establishment.
Well, I don't think they actually only affect small groups of people. So it is true that an issue like the death penalty affects a very small group of people in Singapore, but then the principle of having a death penalty and the way we look at crime that leads us to have capital punishment, we see it very utilitarian. In fact, the changes to the mandatory death penalty for drugs means if you're not useful to the CNB investigation, then you die. If you're useful, then we keep you. That's a mindset that I think is very pervasive in Singaporean society, so it kind of does have impact on other people when we validate this sort of mindset. And for things like freedom of speech, I actually think it affects everybody. Even the government, like pushing for freedom of speech isn't anti-establishment because, it works both ways. It means you have the free speech to criticize the government or support the government. And, if there was ever a day where this particular party fell out of power, they're going to need free speech to be able to get their supporters to come back.
Let me play the devil's advocate. What do you mean by free speech? How free do we want to be? How free do you think the majority of Singaporeans want Singapore to be in terms of speech?
I think a lot of Singaporeans kind of just want what works, and so it's not so much the principle of free speech, but it's just, what can we get out of it?
Pragmatism.
Yes, pragmatism.
Yeah. Is that wrong?
It's not necessarily wrong, but I think it does blinker us to very narrow views. So, we get more and more kind of insular because we're like, oh, we need this, so we must curb free speech. But then that makes us very unused to hearing things that we don't like to hear, and then when that happens, we don't really know how to deal with it, which I think in the long run isn't helpful. Because if you can't deal with disagreement, if you can't engage without taking it very personally, if your reaction is to just ban it rather than actually talk about it, then you can't.
But banning it seems to have worked all these years. Singapore is doing exceptionally well globally. We are punching way ahead of our weight. We are one of the highest. We have one of the highest per capita GDP in the world. Doesn't seem like we have done too badly for ourselves. So why this concern about freedom of speech and freedom of expression?
Because not doing too badly for ourselves doesn't actually cover everyone. So we never talk very much about, racism or discrimination.
Is there racism in Singapore?
Yes, there is racism in
Really?
Singapore.
Why?
I think so. There's so many issues that I feel that ethnic minorities face that we don't deal with because we're so used to this system. And, as someone who is in the majority race, I'm only starting to learn more and more now the experiences.
Give me an example.
So, very simple things like saying that when you see a job ad and it says bilingual applicant, it often means English and Mandarin.
Mm-hmm.
You can't go in and be like, oh, I speak English and Tamil, I'm a bilingual applicant.
But if I'm running a company and 95% of my clients are Chinese speaking, why would I want to hire someone who's bilingual in Tamil?
Yeah, so companies do have different
Is that
needs.
racism? Or is that pragmatism? If you go to Cecil Street or Robinson Road, I can't remember, and you see the Bank of India branch, how many non-Indians do you find working as tellers?
No, I think there is, a difference between a company's needs and, so if you do business with China, it does make sense that you have Mandarin speakers. But often we've also seen, I've seen anecdotes, I don't have statistics, but I've seen anecdotes where, say, a Malay woman who actually does speak Mandarin is still passed over because they don't believe, she's not Chinese. So,
that's different, right?
Having a skill, they just kind of assume based on your race rather than looking at the skills that you actually have. I mean, we could have Malay people who speak Mandarin, we could have Indian people who speak Mandarin, but, I have heard cases where it doesn't. The other thing I find is the ethnic quota for HDB housing.
But there's a rational argument for that, right?
Yes.
What
that it's
do you
good.
think it's not fair that we don't want to create racial enclaves? I mean, that's a rational argument, right?
Yeah, that was the justification for it.
Yeah.
And I do see the grounds in that, but then I think we haven't examined properly the actual effects on the ground today where, ethnic minority families find it difficult to find
sell.
a home, to sell, to buy. And also, if we really wanted to deal with racial enclaves, this quota only applies to HDB, so we do have, expat enclaves, expat Indian enclaves, expat Western enclaves, and we don't have a problem with Bangladeshi enclaves when we push all the Bangladeshi workers to live in Tuas in a big dorm where we don't want to see them.
Migrant workers issues are very close to your heart, right?
Yes.
Were you one of the founders of TWC too?
No, I wasn't.
No, but you're very involved right now. At this point,
I volunteer with them when I can.
Right.
Or I write, but I
Why
like to write.
Why have you chosen these causes? On social justice, for example. I mean, why are they so important to you?
Because I like to see stories that affect people's lives, and so when
But why? I'm just trying to understand what makes you what you are. I mean, how old are you, Kirsten, if I may ask?
27.
27. It's not often that you find a 27-year-old, fighting these causes, expressing your views very lucidly and clearly at this age, where most people want to build their career and so on. You seem to be choosing to fight causes that are non-utilitarian. For example, migrant workers' issues, issues like discrimination and so on, right? So I think it's important for us to understand what drives people like you.
Yeah.
It's a great thing. I think it's a great thing. It doesn't mean that we need to all agree with each other, but we need to be willing to listen.
Yeah.
So what makes you what you are? What was the turning point in your life that made you want to do this?
How I got started was when I was volunteering with the Online Citizen, who was in 2010 running a mandatory death penalty, a campaign against the mandatory death penalty, and I just joined as a
This is after
volunteer.
you came back from England?
From New Zealand.
From New Zealand,
yes.
okay.
I just came back, and it was between me coming back and finding a job, and I had a few months in between. So I started volunteering with them, and at the time I hadn't really thought about it. Actually at the time I was between not thinking about it and actually pro-death penalty. And then I joined TOC. I read up. I didn't realize that there was a mandatory death penalty, and that to me seemed wrong, because why would you not let the judge decide? And then from there, after I started working, I was working in documentaries, and the company was making a documentary on Yong Vui Kong. So it was also about the death penalty in Singapore, and I met his family. I never actually met Vui Kong, I just saw him in court, but I did meet his family. And
how old were you then?
I was
23, 22?
20, I don't remember, I think 22,
Yeah.
21, 22.
Yeah.
And it was very difficult, I think, after having seen him in person and having met his family, to then walk away and say, this has nothing to do with me. So
The truth is, it had nothing to do with you, from a technical
Yes.
point of view, right?
Yeah.
So why did you make it something that had to do with you?
It just felt like the right thing to do. Like, it would have felt wrong to walk away after I met the family and seen the
But what's wrong
distress
with
and
you?
kind of.
For most people, it's the right thing to do, to walk away.
No, but like, I could do something. So that was
Could you?
in.
Could you save his
Yes.
life?
I don't know. I couldn't have saved his life, but I think the trying mattered to me, and like the fact that I could write about it, I could tell people about it. It might be a very small thing in the scheme of things, but I felt like I could do
So
something.
why is the writing important to you? Why is the expression of your views important to you, even if it may not amount to something in the foreseeable future?
Because I think it adds up. So, me writing alone might not make a difference, but since starting writing, I've heard from other people, like other young people, saying, seeing you write makes me want to write, or makes me want to do something. And I think that kind of adds up. So it kind of, like back to Vui Kong, it kind of felt like once I met his brother and sister, I couldn't be like, okay, bye-bye, it was very nice to meet you. Good luck with your problems, and then just left. It felt very much like this was a boy who was being about to be executed in Singapore, and I'm a Singaporean, and the government says they're doing it to protect me, but I don't feel like that's right. And so it felt like, as a Singaporean, I couldn't just be like, this has nothing to do with me, because he's being executed in my name and in all our names. And the same, more recently, I'm working on a case right now about Jabing, who's also a Malaysian, on death row, and I think it does matter.
When you say you're working on a case, what does it mean, Kirsten?
So it means that the family has come to us for help. And
Us, meaning?
So we believe in second chances,
Okay.
which is the anti-death penalty group that I co-founded with 2 others in 2010. So they come to us for help, and then we try to find ways. So we write our own letters of petition to the to the president, saying to grant him clemency. For Jabing's case, I accompanied his sister and his mum to KL, and we went to Malaysian Parliament, and we met the de facto Malaysian law minister and various MPs. And I think it did matter, because technically I didn't need to be there because they could have met by themselves, but it made a difference to the sister and the mum. So the sister was telling me, Jabing's sister, Jumai, was telling me like the night before they had a press conference, her mum couldn't sleep. But then she was trying to comfort her mum, and then her mum finally says, actually it'll be okay because Kirsten will sit next to us and it'll be fine. And so I think it might not change in the big scheme of things. Like, we might not, after all this work, we might ultimately still not be able to save Jabing, but it made a difference to the sister and the mother, and I think that was important. That, even if it fails, they can feel like they've tried everything and they had support and they weren't alone.
That's really wonderful to hear, that especially a young person like you feels that doing this is important, even if it touches 1 or 2 lives. It makes a difference, right? And you had said, Kirsten, on the Sedition Act and specifically about discrimination, right? You talked about if we resort just to legislation like the Sedition Act or regulatory means, and we don't really sit down and talk it through, we may win the battle but lose the war in the long run. I mean, that's in a nutshell what you're trying to say. And you said it also effectively shuts down rational and mature conversations by making certain subjects too sensitive to be broached with any openness and honesty. Do you feel that, there should be open discussions about race and religion in Singapore, or public and open discussions?
Yes.
Are we ready for it?
I think so. I would like to say that Singaporeans are mature enough to deal with these things, but I feel like even if we feel that we are not ready, the Sedition Act just kind of makes us even more not ready, because the more you shut it down, the more you don't talk about it, the more not ready you are going to be. So, it might be messy, it might be difficult, people might get into shouting matches, but it's better to be able to talk about it than to all kind of pretend it's not there.
And wasn't that what exactly Calvin Cheng did, right? Calvin Cheng was being Calvin Cheng, and he made this statement, right, that killing the children, that we should kill the children of terrorists in case they grow up to take revenge.
Yes.
Right, and you came out quite strongly against what Calvin Cheng. My concern now does not lie with what Calvin Cheng says, but with the fact that when approached, the Media Literacy Council has not only failed to respond to a clear breach of its own values and goals by its own member, because he sits on the council, right, but has tried to excuse it by saying it was made in his personal capacity. As a state-endorsed body, there should be more accountability than that, right? Yeah. Now, here's a case where Calvin was expressing his point of view.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And
well, he is free to express his point of view. Like, I don't think anyone who wrote to the Media Literacy Council, or at least not anyone I knew who wrote to the Media Literacy Council, was saying that he's not allowed to say it. Like, no one said that he should be arrested for sedition or charged in court or arrested by police. He does have the freedom to say it, but I think what the concern was is that in line with the Media Literacy Council's values to have someone who expresses such views and who...
To sit on the council.
Yes, to sit on the council.
So the issue is not so much whether he should have expressed his view, whether he has the right to express that view, but your issue was
that the state...
Should he have a place? With such views, should he have a place in the Media Literacy Council?
That the state has put him in a position of some authority to actually be a role model for media discussion, for discussion online.
Well, maybe he's not. What if he's not meant to be a role model? Let me play the devil's advocate. What if the state appoints you to the MDA board, Media Development Authority board? You obviously don't agree with a lot of government policies. A lot of, I mean, you are critical of government policies, and by appointing you there, it doesn't mean that you're going to rubber stamp all government policies. But you could be a necessary impurity in the system to create the combustion that's required for change.
But I think the MLC has a slightly different function, because the MLC is not like the MDA board that kind of regulates. It's meant to foster responsible behavior online and ethical behavior. So its members are meant to be seen as kind of role models, because say if you were on a board that says we're going to fight racism in dialogue, and then you said some really racist thing, then I think it's fair for people to say, why are you on the board? So that was actually the concern that we had about the MLC. And I think there was a sense, it seemed to come across online that I started it because I posted the screenshot and then I galvanized the campaign. But actually I posted the screenshot and then it was friends who said, maybe this should be something that should be taken out of the MLC. And then I agreed to co-sign a letter, which a friend wrote, and then I was one of the signatories.
So in a nutshell, what all this means is that it's going to get really messy, right?
Yes.
The moment we start opening the floodgates and saying, let's have a lot more freedom of speech, we must all be prepared for greater pull and push, right?
Yes.
Just as I think we don't expect and don't want the government to continue to say, come down with a sledgehammer. I think people with rights, people who are pushing for rights, should also accept that sometimes you may be pushed back.
Yes.
You know, it's that sort of calibration that we are going through.
Yes, and I think that makes us kind of learn how to deal with people who disagree.
Yes. And I think that's the most important thing, isn't it? Learning how to deal with disagreements.
Yes.
Right? Last question. Have you had any inconvenient experiences since you started writing? Since you started becoming vocal?
No.
Have you experienced any pushback?
No,
from the government?
I haven't. I had one episode where a friend had said that he received a midnight phone call from Shanmugam, who was the law minister, to warn him about an article that was circulating on Facebook. And I put that on my blog, and the law minister basically rebutted it and said that he gave me the benefit of the doubt that I might have been misinformed, but he just cleared it up, and the friend also cleared it up, and then
that's fair, right?
That was left at that. Yes, so
there were no repercussions.
No, so I think that actually shows how things could go. Like, you know, if he felt that it had been misrepresented, he gets a say, I get a say, we all get a say. Nobody needed to go to jail or to court for that.
Yeah.
And I think that's how we could go forward, because, you know, on social media, the government ministers and MPs, they also have reach on social media. They could also rebut, rather than defamation suits and arrest and everything.
So, what's your message to people out there who say, I don't want to talk about this, I'm afraid to talk about this because of what could happen to me, because of the ISD, because of law minister, and so on. What's your response to people who say that?
I think there is a lot more space than we sometimes let ourselves believe. So that's actually one of the things that I have trouble explaining to people from outside Singapore sometimes, because they veer to either extreme, either Singapore is free and there's no problem, or Singapore is like a police state. And I think the reality is that it's somewhere in the middle, and there is actually a lot more space to push the boundaries and to ask questions than we might believe. But that doesn't necessarily mean we're free, because there is legislation that's still very wide-ranging. But there is a lot more space to actually talk and to discuss. And so I've been blogging, and then now I'm working as a freelance journalist, and I've not been slapped with any lawsuit or gone to prison.
Well,
and I feel that there is space for my work here.
I think that's such an important message, because it's a long journey.
Yes.
And I think those of us who are on board should not drop out along the way, you know. Kirsten Han, thank you very much for making time to be on HitList. This has been IQ HitList with Kirsten Han, who is an online celebrity who is extremely popular because of her insightful thought pieces. I enjoy reading her pieces.
Thank you.
And all I want to say, Kirsten, is stay the course. There are a lot of people who believe in you.
Thank you very much.
Right. Well, log in to our website, www.iq.sg, to watch out for our next IQ hit list. Click the links to see other guests who have appeared on our previous episodes. Post your comments on social media and let us know if there's someone you would like us to interview on HitList.